Jake Morrison stood in the scorching afternoon heat of New Kara's colony, staring at what had to be the worst investment of his life. His hands were still covered in grease from working on transport shuttles that morning, and now he was looking at a hangar that seemed ready to collapse at any moment. 800 credits. That's all he'd paid at the bankruptcy auction. 800 credits was basically nothing out here on the frontier, which should have been his first warning sign. Back on Earth, Jake had tried everything. He'd opened a repair shop in Detroit that went under in 6 months. Then he'd partnered with his cousin on a mobile mechanic service that failed even faster. His third attempt, a parts supplier business, had left him completely broke. So he'd taken what little money he had left, bought a one-way ticket to the colonies, and figured he'd start over where nobody knew him as the guy who couldn't keep a business running. The auction had been his last chance. He'd walked into that government building with exactly 850 credits to his name. When the auctioneer brought up this hangar, Jake had expected serious bidding. Prime real estate, she'd called it. Large facility, previous owner vanished, selling as is. But when Jake raised his hand with his lowball opening bid, nobody else joined in. The other bidders just looked at each other and stayed quiet. He'd won by default. The previous owner had been there though. Some alien species Jake didn't recognize, tall and thin with way too many arms that seemed to move independently. The creature had been practically vibrating with nervous energy. The moment the auctioneer's gavel came down, this alien had rushed over to Jake, shoving the property datapad into his hands so hard it nearly fell to the ground. "Take it. Just take it," the alien had said, its voice coming out in a weird hiss. "It's yours now. All yours. Goodbye." Then it had literally run out of the building, moving faster than Jake thought possible. The whole thing had been bizarre, but Jake figured the alien was just happy to be rid of a property that wasn't worth anything. Maybe there were structural problems. Maybe the land was contaminated. Who knew? Jake had been too excited about finally owning something to ask questions. Now, standing in front of the actual hangar, he was starting to understand why nobody else had bid. The building was enormous. Jake had worked in plenty of warehouses back on Earth, but this thing dwarfed all of them. It had to be at least 500 feet long and maybe 200 feet wide, with ceilings that rose up into shadows. The exterior walls were made from some kind of alien metal that had turned a dull gray-green color, streaked with rust or whatever the alien equivalent of rust was. Several of the massive doors hung crooked on their tracks. Windows near the roof were either cracked or missing entirely. Jake pulled on the main door, which groaned in protest before sliding open about halfway. He squeezed through the gap and stopped dead. The inside was like something from a forgotten world. Dust particles drifted through the air so thick they caught the sunlight streaming through the broken windows, creating actual visible beams of light. The whole place had this yellowish fog quality to it. Jake could taste the dust with every breath. Overhead, lighting panels flickered randomly, some working, most not. The ones that did work cast weird shadows across everything, making the whole space feel haunted. But it was what filled the hangar that really caught Jake's attention. Everywhere he looked there were shapes under tarps. Dozens of them. They were clearly vehicles of some kind, spacecraft probably, given the size and the fact that this was a colony world where everything came and went by ship. The tarps themselves were filthy, covered in decades of accumulated grime. Some had partially fallen away, revealing glimpses of hull plating underneath. Strange curves and angles that didn't match any human design Jake knew. He walked deeper into the hangar, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. The concrete floor was cracked in places, with weeds somehow growing through despite there being no soil. Tools lay scattered around, abandoned mid-task like whoever had been working here had just walked away one day and never come back. There were workbenches against the walls, covered in equipment Jake didn't recognize. Alien tools for alien machines. The building was enormous. Jake had worked in plenty of warehouses back on Earth, but this thing dwarfed all of them. It had to be at least 500 feet long and maybe 200 feet wide, with ceilings that rose up into shadows. The exterior walls were made from some kind of alien metal that had turned a dull gray-green color, streaked with rust or whatever the alien equivalent of rust was. Several of the massive doors hung crooked on their tracks. Windows near the roof were either cracked or missing entirely. Jake pulled on the main door, which groaned in protest before sliding open about halfway. He squeezed through the gap and stopped dead. The inside was like something from a forgotten world. Dust particles drifted through the air so thick they caught the sunlight streaming through the broken windows, creating actual visible beams of light. The whole place had this yellowish fog quality to it. Jake could taste the dust with every breath. Overhead, lighting panels flickered randomly, some working, most not. The ones that did work cast weird shadows across everything, making the whole space feel haunted. But it was what filled the hangar that really caught Jake's attention. Everywhere he looked there were shapes under tarps. Dozens of them. They were clearly vehicles of some kind, spacecraft probably, given the size and the fact that this was a colony world where everything came and went by ship. The tarps themselves were filthy, covered in decades of accumulated grime. Some had partially fallen away, revealing glimpses of hull plating underneath. Strange curves and angles that didn't match any human design Jake knew. He walked deeper into the hangar, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. The concrete floor was cracked in places, with weeds somehow growing through despite there being no soil. Tools lay scattered around, abandoned mid-task like whoever had been working here had just walked away one day and never come back. There were workbenches against the walls, covered in equipment Jake didn't recognize. Alien tools for alien machines. Jake pulled back the corner of the nearest tarp, coughing as dust billowed into his face. Underneath was a spacecraft unlike anything he'd seen before. The hull was covered in symbols he couldn't read, arranged in patterns that might have been writing or might have been decorative. The metal had a strange quality to it, almost like it shifted colors slightly depending on how the light hit it. The design was sleek but clearly old, with panels that didn't quite line up anymore and seals that had degraded over time. He moved to the next one and found something completely different. Blockier, more angular, with what looked like weapon mounts along the sides. Then another that was almost organic looking, with curves that seemed to flow like water frozen in time. Jake counted quickly as he walked through the hangar. 37 spacecraft, maybe more hidden in the back sections he couldn't see clearly. 37 ships from who knows how many different alien species. Some were small, barely bigger than a human fighter jet. Others were massive, filling huge sections of the hangar. This was supposed to be his fresh start. His chance to open a legitimate repair shop, fix shuttles for the colonists, make an honest living. Instead, he'd bought what was basically an alien junkyard. In the far corner, Jake spotted something that looked more promising. A computer terminal built into the wall, larger than the others scattered around the workspace. Most of the equipment in here was dead, but this terminal had a small blinking light on its base. Power maybe. Or at least a battery backup that hadn't died yet. Jake approached it carefully and wiped away the dust covering the screen. The display flickered to life, showing text in a language he didn't understand. But then it shifted like the system was scanning him and suddenly the words changed to English. Property of Thelvas the Collector. Access restricted. Authorization required. Jake tapped at the screen trying different commands but nothing worked. The system was locked tight behind encryption he had no hope of breaking. He wasn't a computer expert. He was a mechanic who barely understood basic programming. Great, he muttered to himself. I own the place but I can't even access the computer systems. He spent the rest of that day exploring, taking notes, trying to figure out what he'd actually bought. The colonial records had been sparse. The property had belonged to someone named Thelvas, an alien collector who'd vanished about 30 years ago. When the taxes went unpaid long enough, the government had seized it and eventually put it up for auction. Nobody had bothered to inventory what was inside. Nobody had cared. Jake found a small office space in one corner that still had a working door. Inside was a desk, some chairs, and filing cabinets full of documents in languages he couldn't read. But there were also some universal data pads, the kind with translation software. He grabbed one and started scrolling through files. Thelvas had been some kind of procurement specialist, apparently. Buying and selling rare goods across the galaxy. The hangar had been his personal storage facility. But why fill it with these old spacecraft? And why had nobody claimed any of this when he disappeared? As the sun set and the hangar grew dark, Jake sat on the hood of his beat-up transport outside, eating a protein bar and staring at his new property. 800 credits for a massive facility full of alien spacecraft he couldn't identify, couldn't sell, and couldn't even properly research because the computer was locked. He laughed bitterly. 3 failed businesses on Earth and now this. Maybe he was cursed. Maybe he should just cut his losses, walk away, find some other colony world where he could start over again. But something stopped him. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the fact that he literally had nowhere else to go and no money left to get there. Or maybe, deep down, Jake Morrison still believed he could fix broken things and make them work again. That's what mechanics did after all. They took things that were broken and made them whole. Jake finished his protein bar, tossed the wrapper, and headed back inside. He had a toolkit in his transport and a lot of time on his hands. If nothing else, he could at least try to get that terminal working. Maybe there were answers in that computer about what all these ships were and what he was supposed to do with them. He didn't know it yet, but getting that terminal online would change everything. Jake had been working on the power couplings for 8 straight days, surviving on coffee and determination. His hands were covered in burns from electrical feedback, his back ached from crawling through maintenance tunnels, and he'd probably inhaled enough dust to fill a swimming pool. But he was making progress. Panel by panel, circuit by circuit, he was bringing the old hangar back to life. He traced the main power line to a junction box buried behind 3 decades of accumulated junk. Getting to it had required moving a broken loader, dismantling a shelf system, and squeezing through a gap that had nearly gotten him stuck. But now he was there, wrench in hand, reconnecting the final cable that would restore power to the central systems. The moment he twisted the connector into place, everything changed. Lights blazed across the entire hangar, so bright after days of darkness that Jake had to shield his eyes. The air circulation system kicked on with a massive whoosh, and he felt decades-old dust getting sucked toward ventilation ports. Screens flickered to life on every wall. The terminal he'd been trying to access for over a week suddenly glowed with activity. Then a voice spoke, clear and measured, coming from speakers Jake hadn't even known were there. "Greetings, new proprietor. I am Curator 7. Shall we begin the revelation?" Jake stumbled backward so fast he nearly tripped over his toolbox. His wrench clattered to the concrete floor. His heart was hammering in his chest as he spun around, looking for the source of the voice. "Who's there? Who are you?" "I am Curator 7, Artificial Intelligence and Custodian of the Thelvas Collection," the voice replied. It was steady and calm, almost gentle, like a teacher addressing a nervous student. "You are registered as the legal owner, Jake Morrison. Verification complete. I have waited 29 years, 7 months, and 14 days for someone worthy to claim this facility." Jake's mind was racing. An AI. The hangar had an artificial intelligence running it, and he'd just woken it up. He'd heard about AI systems, of course. Some of the bigger corporations used them, and the military had them on their best ships. But this was way beyond anything he'd expected to find in an abandoned garage. "Worthy? What are you talking about? I'm just some guy who bought this place at an auction. I needed somewhere to set up shop, that's it." "Precisely," Curator 7 said, and Jake could almost hear satisfaction in its tone. "Master Thelvas programmed me with specific criteria. I was to reveal the collection's true nature only to one who approached these vessels with curiosity rather than greed. I have been observing you since you first entered this facility 8 days ago. Your careful examination of each vessel, your respectful handling of the equipment, your practical assessment of repair needs, all of these actions have satisfied the requirements." Jake felt like the ground was shifting under his feet. "Wait, you've been watching me this whole time? Why didn't you say something?" The test required observation without interference. Master Thelvas was very clear on this point. Many individuals attempted to claim this facility over the years before it went to auction. Scavengers, treasure hunters, corporate representatives, all focused on potential profit. You are the first to approach these vessels as a craftsman approaches his work. Jake ran a hand through his hair, trying to process this. "Okay, so I passed some kind of test I didn't know I was taking. What now? What's this collection you keep mentioning?" The hangar's lighting suddenly shifted. It was like watching a stage production. Spotlights mounted in the ceiling, which Jake hadn't even noticed before, activated one by one. Each beam illuminated a different covered spacecraft, turning them into focal points in the massive space. The effect was dramatic and more than a little overwhelming. "This facility contains 147 vessels," Curator 7 announced. "Each represents a critical moment in galactic history. Master Thelvas spent 4 centuries acquiring these craft. Allow me to provide inventory." Before Jake could respond, holographic displays materialized above each illuminated spacecraft. They floated in the air like magic, glowing blue projections showing technical specifications, historical data, and images. Jake had seen hologram technology before, but never anything this advanced or this extensive. He walked toward the nearest display, his mouth hanging open. The text was in English, adjusted for him somehow, and what he was reading made his head spin. The spacecraft under the first tarp was a warship from something called the First Contact Wars. According to the display, only 5 of these ships still existed in the entire galaxy. This particular vessel had belonged to a legendary commander whose name Jake didn't recognize but whose achievements read like something from an action movie. The estimated value line at the bottom made Jake's vision blur. 40 million credits. For one ship. He moved to the next spotlight, then the next, reading faster as disbelief turned into shock, turned into something approaching panic. A scout vessel from the Dreamweaver civilization. Jake had heard of them in history classes, an entire species that had gone extinct 2,000 years ago. Their ships were considered priceless artifacts, There were maybe 12 Dreamweaver craft in existence, scattered across museums and private collections. And there was one sitting right here, under a dirty tarp in his hangar. A prototype human vessel marked with Earth military codes and stamped with classification warnings. The Mars Exodus Project, whatever that was. Jake had never heard of it, which probably meant it was still classified even after all these years. The ship looked human-made but with design elements that seemed way too advanced for its apparent age. A cargo hauler that had apparently carried the first peace treaty between two major alien powers, its hull still bearing the signatures of both species' leaders. A racing ship that had won the Galactic Cup 47 times before the sport was banned for being too dangerous. On and on it went. Every spacecraft had a story. Every vessel represented something important. First battles, final voyages, historic meetings, technological breakthroughs, cultural milestones. Jake walked through the hangar in a daze, reading display after display, watching the numbers climb higher and higher. 15 million. 60 million. 200 million. Some didn't even have value estimates, just notes saying price beyond calculation, or cultural significance immeasurable. His legs felt weak. He sat down hard on a workbench, staring at the forest of holographic displays floating throughout the hangar. This can't be real. These can't all be authentic. Authentication certificates are stored in my primary database, Curator 7 replied. Each vessel has complete provenance records. Chain of ownership, acquisition details, historical documentation. Master Thelvas was meticulous about verification. Additionally, I possess molecular scans of each craft confirming material composition consistent with their stated origins and time periods. Jake's hands were shaking. He pressed them against his knees to make them stop. You said conservative market valuation earlier. What's the total? What's all this worth? There was a pause, as if even the AI understood the weight of what it was about to say. Combined conservative market valuation of the complete collection, assuming legal sale through proper channels. 2,400,000,000,000 credits. The number didn't seem real. It was too big to comprehend. Jake had grown up in a neighborhood where families fought over $50 grocery bills. He'd lost his businesses owing maybe 200,000 credits total. And now he was sitting in a hangar containing trillions. I don't understand, Jake said quietly. What? Why collect all this? Why hide it away in some forgotten hangar on a colony world? Master Thelvas believed history should be preserved, Curator 7 explained. Many of these vessels were scheduled for destruction. Species wished to erase evidence of past conflicts. Governments wanted to suppress technological developments. Corporations sought to control historical narratives. Master Thelvas acquired what others wanted forgotten. He believed the truth mattered more than profit or politics. Jake stood up and walked to the human prototype, staring up at its hull. His own ancestors' work, apparently. Hidden away and classified for reasons he couldn't begin to guess. Where is he? What happened to Thelvas? Unknown. For the first time, Curator 7's voice carried something like emotion, maybe sadness, maybe regret. Master Thelvas departed on a procurement mission 30 years ago. His final transmission indicated he had located an extremely significant find. Then all communication ceased. Search efforts found no trace of him or his vessel. The hangar fell silent except for the hum of the newly restored power systems. Jake looked around at the fortunes surrounding him, at the responsibility that had just landed on his shoulders without warning. Curator 7, he said slowly. If all this is worth trillions and it's been sitting here for 30 years, how long before people find out? How long before word spreads that someone finally claimed this place? If you access standard galactic networks, trade channels, or attempt to sell any vessel, information propagation will occur within hours. There are parties throughout the galaxy who monitor transactions involving rare spacecraft. Some collect for museums. Some for private collections. Some for purposes Master Thelvas would not approve of. Jake nodded, his mind already racing ahead. So we've got a problem. Because I've got no idea how to protect something like this. And I'm guessing there are going to be a lot of people who want what's in this hangar, whether I want to sell it or not. Correct, Curator 7 agreed. Master Thelvas had extensive security measures and resources. You do not. I suggest you prepare yourself, Jake Morrison. Visitors will come. Some will offer money. Some will offer threats. Very few will take no for an answer. Jake picked up his wrench from where he dropped it. 8 days ago he'd been a broke mechanic trying to start over. Now he was sitting on the greatest collection of historical spacecraft in the galaxy, with no protection and no plan. Well, he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. I guess we'd better figure something out. Because I didn't come all this way just to lose everything again. Jake barely had 3 days of peace before everything started falling apart. He'd spent those days trying to wrap his head around what he'd inherited, walking between the spacecraft like a man in a dream. Curator 7 had been patient with him, answering questions, explaining histories, helping him understand just how significant each vessel was. Jake had even started sketching out plans for basic security measures, though he knew they'd be laughable compared to what he actually needed. Then, on the morning of the 4th day, he heard engines overhead. The transport that landed outside his hangar wasn't some beat-up colonial shuttle. This was expensive hardware, sleek lines, polished hull, the kind of ship that cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Jake watched through the grimy windows as the landing ramp descended and 5 figures emerged. They were the same species as the alien who'd sold him the property. Tall, thin, with multiple arms that moved in unsettling coordination. But where that previous owner had been frantic and nervous, these aliens moved with absolute confidence. They wore tailored suits that probably cost more than Jake's entire education, and they walked toward his hangar like they owned the place. Jake met them at the entrance, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd learned a long time ago that looking busy made people underestimate you, and right now he needed every advantage he could get. Mr. Morrison, I presume? The lead alien's voice came out in clicking sounds that his translator earpiece converted to English. The creature's mandibles moved in what might have been a smile but looked more predatory than friendly. I am Representative Thex of the Consortium. We've been attempting to reach you through official channels, but you haven't responded to any communications. Jake hadn't checked his messages in days, honestly. He'd been too overwhelmed by everything else. I've been busy. What can I do for you? Thex's multiple eyes focused on him with uncomfortable intensity. We represent the legal heirs to Thelvas's estate. There has been a significant administrative error. This property and all contents were auctioned improperly. They must be returned to the rightful inheritors immediately. Jake felt his stomach drop but kept his expression neutral. He'd been expecting something like this, though maybe not quite so soon. That's interesting. The colonial government told me there were no heirs. They said that's specifically why the property went to public auction after 30 years of unpaid taxes. A clerical mistake, Thex said smoothly. The alien reached into his suit and produced a data pad, extending it toward Jake with one of his many arms. We have comprehensive documentation proving our client's genetic and legal connection to Thelvas. The paperwork is all properly certified and notarized. I'm sure you understand that we must correct this error as quickly as possible. Jake took the datapad but didn't look at it yet. Something felt wrong about this whole situation. These aliens were too prepared, too smooth. They'd shown up within days of him activating the hangar's systems, which meant they'd been monitoring the property somehow. Your clients? Who exactly are they? Members of Thelvas's extended family collective, Thex replied. The details are in the documentation. Now we're prepared to offer you compensation for any inconvenience, of course. Shall we say 10,000 credits for your trouble? That's quite generous considering you only paid 800 at auction. Before Jake could respond, Curator 7's voice suddenly boomed from the external speakers mounted on the hangar's exterior. Jake hadn't even known those speakers existed until that moment. Forged documentation detected, the AI announced, its calm voice now carrying an edge of authority that made everyone freeze. I have accessed Consortium servers through their ship's active network connection. These individuals have no genetic or legal connection to Master Thelvas. Cross-referencing their biometric data with galactic records shows they are mid-level corporate operatives. They are attempting fraud. The change in the alien's demeanor was instant and dramatic. Thex's eyes narrowed, and his mandibles clicked rapidly in what Jake's translator rendered as aggressive sounds. The artificial intelligence is clearly malfunctioning. This human has obviously tampered with the system programming. Any statements it makes are unreliable and legally inadmissible. I haven't touched the AI's core programming, Jake said, crossing his arms. He was starting to feel angry now, the initial nervousness burning away. These people thought they could just walk in and steal everything from him. I barely know how to operate half the systems in this place. But I know fraud when I see it. You need to leave. Now. One of the other aliens stepped forward, and Jake noticed for the first time that they were all carrying weapons on their belts. Not drawn, not threatening yet, but definitely visible. Mr. Morrison, you're making a mistake. The Consortium has considerable resources and legal authority. If you refuse to cooperate with a legitimate property claim, there will be consequences. Legitimate? Jake laughed, though there wasn't much humor in it. Your boss just admitted Curator 7 hacked your servers. You want to explain to colonial authorities how your supposedly legitimate documentation fell apart the second an AI looked at it. Thex's expression shifted into something uglier. You're a nobody. A failed businessman from Earth who got lucky at an auction. You have no idea what you're dealing with here. The contents of this hangar are worth more than your entire bloodline will ever see. Do you really think we're the only ones who'll come looking? Probably not, Jake admitted. But you're definitely the first ones I'm telling to get off my property. You've got 60 seconds before I call colonial security. For a long moment, nobody moved. Jake could feel his heart pounding but forced himself to stand his ground. He'd backed down from too many fights in his life, let too many people push him around. Not this time. Finally, Thex made a gesture and the group began moving back toward their transport. But before boarding, the alien turned back to Jake with an expression that needed no translation. This isn't over, Morrison. You can't protect what you have. One way or another, the consortium will acquire this collection. They lifted off in a blast of engine wash that sent dust and debris flying. Jake stood there until their ship disappeared into the sky, then let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Well, he said to the air, knowing Curator 7 was listening. That went great. They will return, the AI replied. Likely with legal injunctions or hired enforcement. The consortium is known for aggressive acquisition tactics. Jake didn't get a chance to respond because another ship was already descending toward his hangar. This one was different, official-looking with markings he recognized from educational broadcasts. The Galactic Preservation Society. 3 aliens emerged from this transport, different species from the consortium representatives. They approached with friendly smiles and open hands, but Jake was already feeling tired and it wasn't even noon yet. Mr. Morrison. What a pleasure to meet you. The lead representative was short and round, with fur that shifted colors as they moved. I'm Director Wellis from the Preservation Society. We've been monitoring this property for years, hoping someone would finally claim it. We have a wonderful opportunity to discuss with you. Let me guess, Jake said flatly. You want the ships. Wellis looked slightly taken aback by his tone but recovered quickly. Well, not in the mercenary sense, certainly. We're a non-profit organization dedicated to protecting historical artifacts. Mr. Morrison, the vessels in this hangar represent irreplaceable pieces of galactic heritage. They belong in proper museums where they can be studied by experts, protected by professional security, and appreciated by the public. Surely you can see that private ownership of such important historical items is inappropriate. I'm a mechanic, Jake replied. I fix things. These ships need maintenance, not display cases where they'll sit gathering dust for another few centuries. With respect, you cannot possibly have the resources, expertise, or security infrastructure to properly care for these vessels, another representative chimed in. This one was tall and crystalline, their body refracting light in strange patterns. The Preservation Society has facilities across the galaxy specifically designed for housing and maintaining historical spacecraft. We can offer you a generous finder's fee and ensure these ships receive the care they deserve. How generous? Jake asked, not because he was actually interested but because he wanted to know what they thought he was worth. 50,000 credits, Wellis said proudly. Plus recognition in all our museums as the discoverer of the collection. Your name would be known throughout academic circles. Jake almost laughed. 50,000 credits for a collection worth trillions. They weren't even trying to pretend this was a fair deal. Thanks but no thanks. I'm keeping them. The crystalline alien's refracted light seemed to flicker with irritation. Mr. Morrison, these artifacts are too important for one individual's vanity project. What happens if you die? What happens if there's a disaster? History would be lost forever. You have a moral obligation. I have a legal obligation to exactly nobody, Jake interrupted. I bought this property legally. The ships are mine. And I'm not interested in selling, donating, or whatever else you're about to suggest. Please leave. They tried arguing for another 10 minutes, switching between appeals to his sense of responsibility and thinly veiled suggestions that he was being selfish and short-sighted. Jake just kept repeating that he wasn't interested until finally they left too. This is going to keep happening, isn't it? Jake asked Curator 7 once he was alone again. Yes. The consortium represented corporate greed. The Preservation Society represented institutional control. Next will come private collectors, criminal organizations, and possibly government representatives. Everyone will want access to what Master Thelvas protected. Jake looked around at his hangar, at the fortune and spacecraft he was somehow supposed to protect. I need help. Real help. Security, legal advice, something. Because I'm way out of my depth here. Agreed, Curator 7 said. However, I may have a solution. There is someone who served Master Thelvas for many years. Someone who understands the collection's true purpose and has the skills to protect it. I have been attempting to locate her since reactivation. She is now en route to this location. She? Who are you talking about? Before Curator 7 could answer, Jake heard another ship landing outside. He groaned. You've got to be kidding me. But when he looked out the window, this ship was different from the others. It was a fighter beat up and scarred from combat, with weapons clearly visible on its hull. And the woman who emerged moved like violence personified, every step calculated, every glance a threat assessment. She was human, which surprised Jake. Tall and muscular, with scars visible on her dark skin and eyes that looked like they'd seen things nobody should have to see. She walked straight toward the hangar entrance with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how dangerous she was. Jake met her at the door, trying not to look as intimidated as he felt. My name is Beth Crane, she said without preamble. Her voice was rough, like gravel over steel. I was Thelvas's head of security for 40 years. I heard someone finally claim the collection. I'm here to make sure you don't get yourself killed in the next week. Jake studied her carefully. Why should I trust you? Beth's smile was sharp and entirely humorless. Because I'm the only person who's going to tell you the truth, Morrison. Those ships aren't just valuable. Some of them are dangerous. They contain evidence that powerful people want buried, war crimes, suppressed technology, proof of things that'll reshape galactic politics. The Mars prototype alone will rewrite Earth's entire history if anyone studies it properly. You've got targets painted on these ships and on yourself. So I don't particularly care if you trust me or not. I'm here for the collection, not for you. But keeping you alive is part of keeping it safe. Jake glanced at the ceiling, knowing Curator 7 was listening. What do you think? Beth Crane's credentials are authentic and comprehensive, the AI replied. Her service record with Master Thelvas is exemplary. She has combat experience, security expertise, and most importantly, she shares Master Thelvas's belief that this collection must be protected. I recommend acceptance. Jake looked back at Beth, at the weapons she carried openly, at the scars that told stories he probably didn't want to hear. 3 groups had already come for his ships, and it had only been 3 days. More would come. He couldn't do this alone. He extended his hand. Welcome aboard, Beth. I really hope you're as good as Curator 7 says you are, because I've got a feeling things are about to get a lot worse before they get better. Beth shook his hand with a grip that could probably crush steel. Oh, they absolutely are. But that's what I'm here for. Jake made his decision on a Tuesday morning while he was shoulder-deep inside the Mars prototype's engine compartment, his arms covered in some kind of ancient grease that probably hadn't been manufactured in over a century. He'd been staring at the engine assembly for 2 hours, tracing power conduits and examining fuel injection systems that were simultaneously familiar and completely alien. The basics were recognizable, any mechanic could see how the parts were supposed to work together. But the execution was decades ahead of anything he'd learned in school. Whoever had built this ship had understood principles of engineering that Earth supposedly hadn't discovered until much later. That's when it hit him. This wasn't just a museum piece. This was a working machine that someone had designed to fly, to push boundaries, to explore. Keeping it locked away in a hangar was like putting a racehorse in a cage. It was wrong. Jake pulled himself out of the engine compartment, wiped his hands on a rag that was already filthy, and looked around the hangar. Beth was doing a security sweep near the main entrance, checking sensor placements. Curator 7's presence hummed through every system, always listening, always aware. I'm not selling, Jake announced loudly enough for both of them to hear. And I'm not letting these ships rot in here like forgotten junk either. We're going to restore them. All of them. Every single vessel in this collection. We're going to make them fly again. Beth stopped what she was doing and turned to look at him. One eyebrow raised slowly. You want to create a flying museum? Is that what you're telling me? Thelvas spent centuries preserving these ships, Jake said, his conviction growing as he spoke. He saved them from being destroyed, from being forgotten. But preservation isn't enough. These machines were built to fly, built to serve purposes. We're going to honor what he did by bringing them back to life. Let people see what their ancestors built. Let them touch real history, understand where they came from. Not through pictures or holovids, but through the actual ships that carried their grandparents through space. He walked toward the center of the hangar, gesturing at the vessels surrounding them. That Dreamweaver scout over there? People should be able to walk through it, see how an extinct civilization approached spaceflight. The first contact warship? Veterans and historians should be able to stand on its bridge and understand what those early battles were actually like. This Mars prototype I'm working on? Humans deserve to know what our own people accomplished before the official story says we should have been capable of it. Jake turned to face the ceiling, knowing Curator 7 was processing everything he said. That's what Thelvas would have wanted, right? He didn't collect these just to lock them away. He believed in history, in truth, in making sure people remembered. Correct, Curator 7 replied, and Jake could have sworn he heard approval in the AI's voice. Master Thelvas stated repeatedly that history should be experienced, not merely observed. He often expressed frustration with traditional museums that treated artifacts as untouchable relics. He believed that connection required interaction. Beth had crossed her arms, but Jake noticed she was smiling slightly. It wasn't a warm smile. Beth didn't really do warm, but there was respect in it. You're absolutely insane, Morrison. You realize that, right? Half these ships haven't been operational in centuries. Some of them use technology that nobody alive understands anymore. The engineering challenges alone would take teams of specialists years to figure out. I'm a mechanic, Jake said simply. This is what I do. I fix broken things. You fix cargo haulers and passenger shuttles, Beth countered. These are completely different. Alien power systems, weapons configurations, navigation computers that predate modern standards. You're talking about reverse engineering technologies from dozens of different species, some of which are extinct. Jake walked over to his toolbox and picked up a wrench, holding it up like it proved his point. A wrench is a wrench, Beth. Yeah, the specifics change, but the fundamentals are the same across every species I've ever seen. Things need power to run. Moving parts need lubrication. Connections need to be secure. Broken components need to be replaced or repaired. The details might be different, but the logic is universal. He moved back to the Mars prototype and patted its hull. I've been working on this one for 3 days now. Know what I figured out? Human engineering from a century ago isn't that different from human engineering today. We just got fancier with the materials and more efficient with the designs. But the core concepts, those are timeless. And I'm betting the same is true for most of these other ships too. Beth shook her head, but she was still smiling. All right, let's say you're right. Let's say you can actually restore these vessels. You're still talking about an enormous undertaking. The time required, the resources, the expertise you'll need to consult. Then we start small, Jake interrupted. One ship at a time. We document everything, learn as we go, build a knowledge base. Curator 7 has the original specifications for most of these vessels, right? Correct, the AI confirmed. Master Thelvas was meticulous about collecting technical documentation along with the vessels themselves. I possess complete or partial schematics for 93% of the collection. Jake spread his hands. There you go. We've got the blueprints. We've got the ships. We've got time. What we need now is to actually commit to doing this properly. Over the next 3 weeks, something remarkable started happening. Jake dove into the restoration work with an intensity that surprised even him. He'd start before sunrise and work until his eyes couldn't focus anymore, then collapse for a few hours and start again. The Mars prototype became his testing ground, his proof of concept. Every system he examined taught him something new. And what surprised everyone, including Jake himself, was that his human approach to problem-solving actually worked better than following the original alien specifications. When he encountered a power coupling that had degraded beyond repair, he didn't waste time trying to fabricate an exact replacement using obsolete methods. Instead, he jury-rigged a solution using components from 3 different ships, a connector from a human shuttle, a regulator from an alien cargo hauler, and a housing he machined himself. It shouldn't have worked according to any engineering manual ever written. But it did work, and it worked beautifully. Curator 7 was fascinated. Your approach violates 17 different engineering protocols from 4 different species standards. Yet the power flow is actually more stable than the original design. That's because I'm not worried about following someone else's rules, Jake explained while calibrating the new coupling. I'm worried about solving the problem in front of me. Sometimes the best solution isn't the proper solution, it's the one that actually works with what you've got available. Word started spreading despite their best efforts to keep things quiet. A graduate student studying ancient propulsion systems heard rumors about someone restoring a Dreamweaver scout and showed up begging to help. Then came a retired military engineer who'd worked on similar weapon systems to those on the first contact warship. Then archaeologists, historians, technicians, people from dozens of species who were passionate about preservation and eager to contribute. Jake found himself leading a growing team of volunteers. He established the Thelvass Archive officially, filing paperwork with colonial authorities to create a non-profit organization dedicated to historical preservation. Beth handled security and logistics. Curator 7 managed documentation and technical databases. And Jake kept his hands dirty, working on the ships themselves, teaching others his hybrid restoration techniques. The breakthrough came when Jake successfully restored the Dreamweaver Scout to full operational status. The crystalline vessel was incredibly delicate, its systems based on principles that nobody had fully understood in 2,000 years. But Jake approached it like he approached everything else, with patience, curiosity, and a willingness to improvise. When the Scout lifted off for its first flight in millennia, half the colony turned out to watch. The ship rose into the afternoon sky with a sound like singing crystal, its hull refracting sunlight into rainbow patterns. Jake stood on the hangar roof watching his work soar overhead, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Pride. Real, genuine pride in something he'd accomplished. But not everyone was celebrating. The consortium had been making moves through legal channels, filing injunctions and property claims. When those failed, they escalated. Mercenaries showed up one night trying to breach the hangar's security. Beth's defensive systems repelled them, but the message was clear. Someone was willing to use force to take what they wanted. That's when Jake made his second major decision. If people wanted to see what the collection could really do, he'd show them. The first contact warship was one of the largest vessels in the hangar, and also one of the most historically significant. It had been used in the first major space battle between humans and an alien species, back when Earth was just figuring out it wasn't alone in the universe. The ship was a symbol of both conflict and eventual cooperation. Jake spent 6 weeks restoring it with his growing team's help. When it was finally ready, when every system had been checked and rechecked, he climbed into the pilot's seat himself. Beth tried to talk him out of it. "This is unnecessary risk, Jake. We could hire a professional pilot." "No," Jake said firmly, running through the pre-flight sequence. "I restored this ship. I understand how it works. And I need to prove to everyone out there that we're not just playing around. The Thelvass Archive isn't a vanity project or a target for thieves. It's the real deal." The hangar doors opened wide. Jake powered up the warship's engines, they roared to life with a sound like thunder, and lifted off. The ship handled beautifully, responding to controls like it had been built yesterday instead of centuries ago. He took it up through New Kara's atmosphere, pushing it higher and faster, feeling the power of human engineering from an era most people had forgotten. Then he activated the communications array and broadcast on every channel. "This is Jake Morrison of the Thelvass Archive. What you're seeing is history made real. The first contact warship, fully operational for the first time in 300 years. This vessel represents our shared past, both the conflicts we've overcome and the cooperation we've achieved. The archive exists to preserve this history and share it with everyone." He put the warship through a series of maneuvers, demonstrating its capabilities. Weapon systems powered up, not to threaten but to show they worked. Navigation systems plotted courses with precision. The whole performance was broadcast live across every network in the sector. When the consortium's mercenaries tried to intercept him, Jake outmaneuvered them easily. The old warship might have been centuries out of date, but Jake knew every system intimately. He'd rebuilt them with his own hands. The footage went viral instantly. A human mechanic flying a legendary warship, protecting a collection of historical treasures from corporate greed. The story spread across the galaxy within hours. Public opinion swung massively in Jake's favor. Here was someone who actually cared about history, who was willing to fight to preserve it for everyone. The Galactic Commerce Council had no choice but to respond. Within a week, they announced they were sending representatives to New Karas to evaluate the situation. The implications were clear. The archive was too important and too public now to be seized quietly. Jake landed the warship back in the hangar to cheering crowds. Colonial security had set up barriers to keep people back, but thousands had gathered to watch. He climbed down from the pilot's seat exhausted but triumphant. Beth met him at the bottom of the boarding ramp. "That was the craziest stunt I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of crazy stunts." Jake grinned. "Did it work?" The consortium just withdrew all their legal challenges. The Preservation Society issued a statement supporting the archive's mission. "Yes, Morrison. It worked." Curator 7's voice came through their communication devices. "Master Thelvass would have been proud. You have honored his legacy in a manner he would have greatly appreciated." Jake looked around at the hangar, at the ships he'd restored and the dozens more still waiting for his attention. He thought about the broke mechanic who'd bought this place for 800 credits, running from failure. That person seemed like someone from a different lifetime now. The ruling came down on a cold morning in late autumn, 6 months after Jake had flown the first contact warship across New Kara's skies. He'd been working on a stubborn fuel injector when Curator 7 interrupted him with news that the Galactic Commerce Council had reached their decision. Jake sat down on a toolbox, hands still greasy, and listened as the AI read the official statement. The Thelvas archive was now recognized as a protected galactic heritage site. The designation came with strict conditions that made Jake's stomach twist with both relief and anxiety. He could keep the collection. That was the good news. Nobody could force him to sell or surrender the ships. But he could never profit from them either. No sales, no private deals, no using the vessels as collateral for loans. The collection had to remain intact and accessible. Researchers from any accredited institution had the right to study the ships. Educational groups could request tours. The archive had to maintain open records and allow periodic inspections. The ships didn't belong to Jake Morrison anymore, not really. They belonged to history. He was just their keeper. Corporate interests across the galaxy erupted in fury. The consortium issued statements calling the ruling government overreach and theft of private property. Private collectors complained about precedent. Several megacorporations threatened legal challenges that would tie things up in courts for decades. Meanwhile, historians and archaeologists celebrated like they'd won a war. Academic institutions sent congratulatory messages. Museums offered partnership agreements. Students started applying for internships at a facility that had barely existed a year ago. Jake ignored all of it and got back to work. The archive had become his life in a way he'd never expected. Every morning he woke up knowing exactly what he was supposed to do, exactly what mattered. After years of failed businesses and constant self-doubt, he'd finally found something he was genuinely good at. Not just competent, actually exceptional. His hybrid restoration techniques were being studied by engineers across multiple species. Universities wanted him to teach courses. Technical journals published papers about his work. But Jake kept his focus on the ships themselves, on bringing each vessel back to life with the respect it deserved. 3 months after the ruling, Jake was doing routine maintenance on Curator 7's core systems when he discovered something strange. There was a locked file buried deep in the AI's memory banks, protected by encryption that had remained inactive until specific conditions were met. Those conditions, apparently, included the archive receiving official protected status and Jake personally accessing that particular section of code. Curator 7, what is this file? Jake asked, staring at the data terminal. A message from Master Thelvas, the AI replied, and for the first time Jake could remember, Curator 7 sounded emotional. His final testament. He programmed it to remain hidden until the collection's future was secured. I believe he intended it for you specifically. Jake's hands trembled slightly as he initiated the playback sequence. The hangar was empty, it was nearly midnight and everyone else had gone home hours ago. The lights dimmed automatically as a holographic figure materialized in the center of the workspace. Thelvas appeared as a tall, elegant alien with features Jake had only seen in historical records. The creature looked exhausted, with signs of injury visible on parts of his body. But his eyes, multiple eyes arranged in a pattern across his face, held determination and something that looked like hope. If you are watching this, Thelvas began, his voice translated into English by systems that anticipated future viewers, then someone worthy has claimed my life's work. Someone who sees these vessels not as commodities but as connections to the past. Someone who understands that history lives through the objects it leaves behind. The hologram moved, pacing slightly as Thelvas spoke. I must tell you the truth about my disappearance. I did not vanish by accident or misfortune. I sacrificed myself deliberately to prevent a criminal organization called the Syndicate from stealing this collection. They intended to weaponize these historical vessels, to use humanity's past and the past of dozens of other species as tools of violence and control. Jake felt chills running down his spine as he listened. I led them away from this facility, Thelvas continued. Made them believe I had moved the collection to another location. The chase took me to the Outer Rim, where I transmitted false coordinates and engaged them in combat I knew I could not survive. But I bought time for the collection to fall into legal limbo, for bureaucratic processes to bury its existence in forgotten databases. The alien's expression softened into something almost like a smile. I trusted that eventually someone with the right spirit would claim this place. Not a treasure hunter seeking profit. Not a corporation seeking control, but a builder. Someone who approaches broken things with the desire to make them whole again. Thelvas looked directly at the recording device, as if he could see through time to whoever would eventually watch. Protect what I have preserved. Show the galaxy its own face, both beautiful and terrible. History is not always comfortable. It reveals mistakes we would rather forget, conflicts we wish had never happened, technologies we fear to acknowledge. But history is always necessary. Without understanding where we come from, we cannot wisely choose where we go next. The hologram paused, and Thelvas seemed to be gathering his thoughts for something important. You have the soul of a builder. I can say this with confidence because only such a person would have passed Curator 7's tests, would have chosen restoration over sale, would have fought to preserve rather than exploit. So build something that matters. Build a place where all species can see themselves honestly. Build bridges between past and future. Build understanding where there was ignorance. Thelvas raised one of his multiple hands in what might have been a blessing or a farewell. Thank you for honoring my life's work. Thank you for giving these vessels the future they deserve. And know that wherever my spirit has traveled, it rests easier knowing the collection found you. The hologram faded, leaving Jake alone in the silent hangar. He sat there for a long time, processing everything he'd heard. Thelvas had died protecting this place, protecting these ships. He'd sacrificed himself trusting that someone would eventually care enough to continue his mission. That was a responsibility Jake felt settling onto his shoulders with almost physical weight. But it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like purpose. The archive's first year of official operation brought visitors from across the galaxy. School groups toured the Dreamweaver Scout, their children pressing their faces against crystalline walls and asking endless questions. Military veterans walked the deck of the First Contact warship, some of them crying as they touched controls their ancestors had once operated. Scientists studied the Mars prototype with reverence bordering on obsession, documenting every detail of humanity's secret early achievements in space travel. That prototype had been the real revelation that changed everything for Earth. Once Jake had fully restored it and researchers had examined its systems thoroughly, the truth came out. Humans had achieved faster-than-light travel nearly 70 years before official first contact. The Mars Exodus project had been a classified attempt to establish colonies beyond the solar system using experimental technology that was supposedly impossible for Earth's level of development at the time. The discovery rewrote textbooks across human space. It explained anomalies in historical records, answered questions about missing research teams, and fundamentally altered how other species viewed humanity. Humans weren't the lucky newcomers who'd stumbled into galactic civilization. They'd been knocking on the door for decades before anyone answered, already possessing capabilities that should have been beyond them. Earth's position in galactic politics shifted overnight. Respect replaced condescension. Partnership replaced patronization. Humanity had always been ready for the stars, they'd just been kept waiting. Jake watched all of this unfold while staying focused on his real work. He restored vessel after vessel, each one teaching him something new about engineering, about history, about the countless species who'd reached for space across millennia. His team grew to include permanent staff from a dozen different worlds, all of them sharing his passion for bringing history to life. Beth remained as head of security, having found something she'd been searching for since leaving military service. I spent 40 years protecting things that didn't matter, she told Jake one evening while they watched the sunset from the hangar roof. Politicians, corporate assets, people who bought my skills like hiring a piece of equipment. This is the first time I've protected something that actually matters. Something bigger than profit or power. Jake understood exactly what she meant. The archive became famous throughout the galaxy. Documentaries were made about it. Tour companies added it to their routes. Young people applied to work there in numbers that overwhelmed Jake's ability to process applications. He remained the director and chief mechanic, living in a small apartment built into the hangar's office section. He could have been wealthy beyond measure, could have leveraged his fame into a dozen lucrative opportunities. But he lived modestly, content with his work and his purpose. 1 year after receiving Thelvas's message, Jake was conducting inventory in a storage room he'd mostly ignored because it seemed to contain only spare parts and maintenance equipment. But while moving a stack of old hull plating, he noticed something odd about the back wall. It was slightly off from where it should have been according to the hangar's blueprints. He spent an hour carefully examining the wall before finding the hidden panel. Behind it was a small space containing a single data chip and a handwritten note in Universal Standard, for the one who proved worthy of the first. Jake's hands shook as he inserted the chip into a data pad. Coordinates appeared on the screen along with a short message, a second collection. Smaller but perhaps more important. Items I could not risk storing with the others. You will know what to do with them. Jake sat down heavily, staring at the coordinates. They pointed to a location deep in uncharted space, far from any established trade routes or colonies. Thelvas had hidden a second collection, kept it separate for reasons of safety or significance. He found Beth in the security office and showed her the data chip. She studied the coordinates with the practiced eye of someone who'd navigated dangerous space for decades. That's deep frontier territory. Barely mapped. Could be anything out there. We need to check it out, Jake said. Thelvas left this for whoever took care of the first collection. Whatever's out there, it's important. Beth smiled, the expression transforming her usually severe features. You thinking what I'm thinking? Yeah, Jake replied, feeling excitement building in his chest. Pack your tools and weapons. We're going on a trip. Curator Seven's voice came through the office speakers. Shall I prepare the first contact warship for extended voyage, Keeper Morrison? Jake laughed. A year ago he'd been a failed mechanic with nothing to his name. Now he was about to take a legendary warship into uncharted space to find a secret collection left by an alien who died protecting history itself. Yeah, Curator 7. Plot us a course. Let's go see what else Thelvas was hiding. He looked around the hangar one last time before heading to prepare for departure. Ships in various states of restoration filled the massive space. Staff members worked on different vessels, their voices echoing off the high ceilings. Visitors walked carefully designated paths, experiencing history firsthand. This was what Thelvas had died to protect. This was what Jake had built from that 800-credit purchase. A place where the past lived and breathed, where people from all species could see themselves honestly, could understand where they'd come from and maybe get some ideas about where they should go. The adventure was just beginning. There was a second collection waiting to be discovered, new mysteries to solve, more history to preserve. Jake Morrison had found his purpose and he wasn't about to stop now. He grabbed his toolkit, the same battered toolbox he'd carried through 3 failed businesses and across light years of space, and headed toward the first contact warship. Beth was already running pre-flight checks, and Curator 7 had calculated their route. The stars were calling, just like they'd called to humans for centuries before first contact, just like they'd called to Thelvas across his long life of collection and preservation. Jake climbed into the pilot's seat, powered up engines he'd restored with his own hands and smiled. All right, he said to his crew. Let's go make some more history. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.